Okay, good morning, everybody. Good morning from beautiful BC, at least this morning here. For those of you east of Alberta, I guess it's afternoon already. My name is Bill Hardy. I'm a director with Canadian Nursery and Landscape Association, as well as with Communities in Bloom. So welcome to our 2020 virtual symposium presentation today. We're excited to learn more about the topic of garden tourism today. Before we begin though, we'd like to thank all our Communities in Bloom sponsors and partners at this time for their contribution towards our 2020 symposium. Without them, it simply wouldn't be possible. So their partnership and sponsorship and participation is truly appreciated. Today's webinar is sponsored by our longtime sponsor, the Butchart Gardens. Thank you so much to Butchart Gardens for their support of our program this year, as well as many years in the past. So we have a short video to share from the Butchart Gardens, and we'll show that now. Thank you very much for that video. Before I introduce today's speakers, just a little bit of housekeeping. If we encourage you to ask questions during the presentation, just use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. That's the way that it works best. You can ask them at any time throughout the presentation. We'll collate them and make sure we have all the questions answered afterwards. If you don't see the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen, just hover your mouse over the bottom and it should pop up with the other information. So anyway, now it's my pleasure to welcome our two speakers today, Michel Gauthier and Dave Cowen. First, we'll start with Dave Cowen. As CEO of the Butchart Gardens, Dave leads a team of nearly 700 staff overseeing daily operations and strategic initiatives. Formerly the general manager, Dave is actively involved in leadership positions in the tourism and business communities, serving as a founding member and past president of Gardens British Columbia, and as a board member of Canadian Garden Council. Dave is currently chair of the Greater Victoria Harbour Authority and co-chair of the Tourism Committee for the Pacific Northwest Economic Region. He was formerly chair of Tourism Victoria, and for over 15 years has been an active member on various boards and industry organizations throughout the region. He is a proud recipient of the Pacific Northwest Economic Region Robert Day Memorial Award, which is awarded to someone in the private sector who has played a major role in bringing collaboration between cross-border organizations and stakeholders. Our second speaker today, Michel Gauthier, has distinguished himself in the festival, tourism, and garden industry, accumulating the expertise and developing leadership qualities along the way. His long list of accomplishments include leadership roles for Winterlude between '84 and '88, the Canadian Tulip Festival from '92 to 2005, also as Director of Operations and then Development Advisor for Mosaiculture Montreal, Executive Director of International Floral Montreal, and the Rideau Canal Festival, as well as management of various blockbuster exhibitions like Treasures of the Vatican and the Gold of Peru. Since 2014, he has provided management services for the Canadian Garden Council, Canada's Garden Route, the International Garden Tourism Conference, Garden Tourism Awards, and Garden Days. And if he wasn't busy enough, he's also on a volunteer basis chair of the World Tulip Society and president of Gardens Ottawa. So I'm going to turn it over now to Dave and Michel. Take it away, you two.
Good day. Bonjour to everyone out there. Now let me just share my screen here. There we go. Okay. So today we want to talk about garden tourism, and to do so we want to take you along Canada's garden route and talk about how you could use Communities in Blooms can use Canada's garden route as a marketing tool. And since we have quite a bit of traveling to do right across the country, I say let's get going right away. Dave, are you okay with that?
I'm ready to travel, Michel.
Okay. So Canada's garden route. So we can say that this garden route is a garden experience promotion. It has a website that is linked to gardenscanada.ca website. It's supported by a digital, social media, public relations campaign. On an annual year, we generate about 5 million impressions out there. And, you know, we work with the garden route participants to promote this, and we also work with our sponsors, you know, Scott's and many of the others that are associated to great garden experiences. And this is all managed by the Canadian Garden Council and of course supported by CNLA. And so what we want to do now, Dave and I, is travel across the country to show you some of the gardens, not all. There are hundreds of gardens on the route, but these are some of the featured gardens on the Canada's Garden Route. So Dave, I'll let you do the first one.
Well, thank you, Michel, and welcome everybody. Bonjour. Here is our iconic garden, the Sunken Gardens, here at the Butchart Gardens. I think when you look at this shot, it's humbling to remember just how humble our beginnings were as a limestone quarry under the vision of Jenny Butchart some 116 years ago. This is a reclaimed industrial site, and to this day we curate her original vision. In a normal year, we have upwards of 1.3 million visitors and about 700 staff, and we're open every day of the year. Here's what the gardens look like now in October. Beautiful fall shot out of the Japanese garden. It's really a time for sumptuous borders of perennials. We're starting to switch over. A lot of mums in the gardens this time of year. Peak color will come in a week or two. We generally are a little bit behind Victoria in our microclimate, but lots of russets and golds. Beautiful time of year to visit. Next slide. Behind the scenes, we are madly working on Christmas. In fact, we've been talking about Christmas since July, and our crew is out there now stringing thousands of Christmas lights. We're very proud to be moving forward with the Christmas plan in 2020. Everybody's going to be wearing masks along with their Christmas sweaters, but we are looking forward to bringing some joy to our local community. Next slide, Michelle.
Okay, so now this is Dr. Sun Yat-sun Classical Chinese Gardens. It's in Victoria in China, historic Chinatown. This is about 2 acres as a garden. And this garden welcomes about, I think it's a little over 100,000 visitors a year. And it's very traditional, very beautiful, and great experience, been there before. So, Dave?
Thank you. As we move along the country, this is the University of Alberta Devonian Botanic Gardens. So 80 acres of display gardens and 160 acres of natural areas and ecological preserves. Here you see lilacs in bloom, and you can see them from the outlook tower for another perspective. There also is an amazing maze. You'll notice in this particular garden, the hedge is kept very low, so you won't get lost. It's a very fun, interactive way of educating children that gardening is fun. Next, we have the Aga Khan Garden, which opened in the fall of 2018. This is an amazing project, an absolutely idyllic setting for reflection and learning. It's 4.8 hectares in size and was gifted by His Highness the Aga Khan as a symbol of the continued intellectual, educational, and cultural collaboration between the University of Alberta and the Aga Khan Development Network. Really an extraordinary interpretation of the Islamic landscape architecture in a northern climate. Very, very unique project. And if you haven't seen it, I encourage everybody to go and visit.
And now we go to Manitoba, to the Assiniboine Park Conservatory, and we have several theme gardens that are located there, and including an English garden. Here is a children's garden, the Struber Children's Nature Playground, if you want. And this is Leo Moll's sculpture garden. And they are just in the process of building a new garden, the Diversity Garden, which is a huge project that should be opening probably 2021. Everything going as planned.
And of course, who doesn't know about Niagara Park's Botanical Gardens? Established in 1936, 99 acres, 40 hectares in size, just beautifully maintained gardens that include perennials, rhododendrons, azaleas, and of course, home to the Niagara Park School of Horticulture, an institution that provides unique practical training to horticultural students on the grounds of the Botanical Gardens. And the formal parterre garden, herb and vegetable plantings, and we'll say our world famous rose garden featuring over 2,400 roses.
Another garden in Ontario is the Royal Botanical Garden that I think doesn't need any introduction, world famous. Basically 300 acres of cultivated gardens, 27 kilometers of natural trails, and over 2,300 plant species. So a lot of various experience there, and again, a place where you can get lost for the whole day and enjoy.
And the little gem that is the Toronto Botanic Garden. Just an array of award-winning theme gardens designed to educate and inspire. And it's home to Canada's largest private horticultural library. So a very, very interesting garden in the heart of Toronto. So we'll just go back to a notable feature that I know Harry would want us to mention.
Okay.
We've got the, you'll see here the slope portion of the green roof of their particular facility was planted in 2005 with a good mixture of low-growing sedums. These very drought-resistant plants in this xeriscape have required very little maintenance, and I know there were a number of us early on in the history of green roofs who are skeptics, but here's an example of one that's been thriving and can survive a good winter climate. And the flat portion of the roof has quite a variety of wildflowers if you see them in spring bloom. Michel?
Okay. Okay. And now we go to Quebec for Montreal's Botanical Garden, of course, another huge garden, 75 hectares, and one of the oldest in the country. And this has a very diverse area of plants that visitors can take on, at all seasons. And so they have theme gardens, and they have 10 exhibition greenhouses. They also have Gardens of Light, which of course features Chinese and Japanese gardens and showcase nature, and great place in the fall, especially where they do put on a great show with this Garden of Lights. And then the other big part of this garden is half of it is dedicated to an arboretum. And in this arboretum, they have over 7,000 species of trees. Some of you might have also been there when Mosaic Couture was featured in this garden, and certainly it had the space for it. But this is a very beautiful downtown Montreal garden.
And next on our route, we have Les Jardins de Métis, Reeford Gardens, just an extraordinary achievement of a passionate gardener, Elsie Reeford. In the summer of 1926, at the age of 54, she began transforming her fishing camp on the Métis River into a garden. And just a beautiful, beautiful national iconic garden. And now the gardens are home to more than 3,000 species, cultivars, and a variety of plants, both native and exotic. And this particular picture was the historic garden. The Long Walk is one of Elsie Reeford's most original creations, and it's modeled on the mixed herbaceous borders designed for some of England's great gardens by Gertrude Jekyll. The Long Walk is a subtle reinterpretation of Jekyll's model. And of course, here we see lilacs and peonies, delphiniums, lilies and phlox, and roses. Michel?
Oh, and this is the Himalayan blue poppy, right? Which
Very
the garden
famous.
is famous for. And now we go, oh, sorry,
Go
Dave.
ahead, Michel.
Okay. And next we go to New Brunswick with Kingsbury Garden. Located in St. Andrews by the sea. This one is 24 acres and featuring over 50,000 perennials in many themed gardens. So they have a beautiful cafe where people can drop in, and while you're eating, and you can watch some of the alpacas and some of the animals roaming around. So always an interesting feature. And of course, they also have a Canadian sculpture contest. Every year they host different artists. Every second year, I should say, they host different artists that compete for a grand prize of $20,000 in first position, 15 in the second one. But then they display these works of art, these sculptures, and creating a beautiful sculpture garden. So something very different.
In my hometown, Michel, the Halifax
Ooh.
Public Gardens. So the Nova Scotia Horticultural Society started the gardens in 1836. And now Halifax Public Gardens is a 16-acre national historic site that showcases a public collection of garden artifacts such as statues, a wonderful bandstand and fountains, which are representative of the Victorian era. Another garden nestled in the heart of the city, a favorite of everybody. Statues and wrought iron gates, all fundamental features of the High Victorian Pleasure Garden, are featured at Halifax Public Gardens.
And then we go to Nova Scotia, where there's the Annapolis Royal Historic Gardens. And again, this is 17 acres, historic garden. What's interesting here is this is where Champlain built the first garden in Canada in 1605, believe it or not. And so many beautiful historic presentations of gardens, talking to us about the history, including this Acadian house, 1671 Acadian house, which is one of the highlights of this garden. And also what they claim to be the largest collection of roses in Eastern Canada, very beautiful rose garden to show the many varieties that Canada is able to present and is able to grow.
And to prove that gardens in Canada go coast to coast to coast, we have the Memorial University of Newfoundland's Botanical Garden, which is 100 acres of themed gardens and nature trails through a boreal forest. It's a resource center for basic and applied botanical research and education, with particular interest in the flora of Newfoundland and Labrador. The garden is most famous for its rock garden and also as an alpine house and trough collection. And here on the next page is a very, very interesting shot of a crevice garden, which is a very specialized form of a rock garden where the rocks are positioned rather closely together and linearly in vertical pattern. And the results is very, very many narrow cracks or small crevices for these plants to grow. So small stature alpines are planted between the cracks, and there are over 200 species growing in this small garden. I think it's a spectacular example. And the Heritage Garden features old-fashioned perennials that have been growing in local Newfoundland, again, for over 100 years, which I think is remarkable. These plants were brought to Newfoundland by the early settlers from the United Kingdom.
And that lady, ladies and gentlemen, takes us across the country and gives you a sample of the gardens that we offer in Canada and the gardens that are featured on Canada's garden route. Now, there are many other gardens on Canada's garden route. We have a collaboration with Parks Canada. We have some of their gardens. We have heritage gardens, and so it's one place to find Canada's garden experience. Now, how can you use Canada's garden route? Well, it's a great way to let the world know about your community and the garden experience that you offer, and let also the world know about the great work you're doing in your community by enhancing the floral and garden experience of your community. It can also be used as recognition and motivation for the volunteers, so that all of the good work that many of you are doing with the volunteers are doing, is presented to Canadians and the rest of the world. We think it can also enhance the support from the elected officials to see that their community is featured on Canada's garden route. And of course, it can, what we're talking about tourism, it can enhance the tourism appeal of your community to the world. And in doing so, we can attract garden tourists to your community. And maybe, someone that's very familiar with tourism, I'd like to ask Dave to talk to us a little bit about garden tourism.
Thank you, Michel. It's been an interesting journey for Butchart over the years. We do all of our hard work to share it with the world, and it's very, very pleasing to see visitors who come from Europe and Japan and China and all different parts of the world come and appreciate what we do here in Canada. And I think my message to everybody on the call is that when you look at the collective garden inventory of Canada, it really stands up to any other country in terms of being a fantastic route to inspire people to travel and explore. Tourism is one of the $1 trillion sectors on the planet. It's a very, very large sector that exhibits very consistent growth. Obviously, in COVID year, it's a little bit different, but it is a sector that touches virtually every city and town across our country. So, as small towns move from primary industries like mining or perhaps forestry, tourism is something that they can embrace as their small towns beautify. So it really is important to every small community, and it's a point of pride. It's a way for citizens to develop an image or a brand for their community and put that message out. You definitely don't need to be big to engage in the tourism world. In fact, the type of traveler that comes to a garden is somebody looking for a small boutique and unique experience, someplace where locals like to go or where travelers like to go. So what you need to get into tourism is quite minimal, but the first piece is to really understand who is the garden tourist. And again, it's the person who's interested in seeing the backyard garden or what a town has done with its central square. You should know where your visitors are coming from and how do you reach them. And Michel will touch on some of these points in the next slides. Michel?
Yes, so as we, define the garden tourism, as Dave was saying, it's people that love to travel and to other communities to take in garden-related activities and experiences. And so, be it a garden, be it a festival, be it public, be it private, be it a community experience, okay? I think those are the type of people. And what's interesting, and garden tourists are part of, when you look at them in a bigger picture, they're part of what we call the cultural tourists also. And so the cultural tourist has a very strong interest in the garden experience. And so, who are these cultural tourists? And so they've been, people have looked at, who they are. And so, yeah, they take more trips compared to other types of travelers. The the higher education is one of the characteristics of the cultural tourists. Of course, they tend to be overnight tourists because they want to enjoy the community or the place they're in, as opposed to drop by. And of course, being the cultural tourists, they tend art shows, museums, galleries, historic sites, and the garden, and yes, the shopping and the dining, and yes, the wines, and so this is where your communities, offer a lot of that appeal to them, and this is where we think, there is a good fit there in terms of garden tourism. And then when we, dig into the motivation of the garden tourists, yes, they want a garden experience. Yes, they love to be in nature. Yes, they're looking to relax, and they're looking for family time. And also they look to be inspired. They're looking for ideas that they might be able to implement or bring home with them, okay? And also it might have been word of mouth because a lot of the garden tourists are connected to the garden world and they've heard about this. There's a great reputation. I mean, who doesn't want to go to Butchart? We know about Butchart. If you're a gardener and you're a garden tourist, it's on your to-do list. And of course, curiosity, might say, hey, let me check this out. I've never heard about it. So why not check it out? And so,
Michel, it's interesting. The number one question we get here at Butchart is what other gardens are there in the local area to explore? So, the public garden really does bring along a whole ecosystem of other cultural attractions. It really is a catalyst.
yes, and you're right, because somewhere, when you look at the garden tourists, it says that, they tend to visit more than one garden. Okay, and they're passionate about it. If they're in a setting, they want to see as much as they can. Okay, so Dave and I were talking about communities in bloom and the appeal of your destination to garden tourists. And our feeling is that your communities, because of its dedication, to the garden and all the beauty that you're putting into it, is you have that appeal, the floral garden experience appeal, and most of the communities are also offering food, heritage, art, cultural experiences, and you have some of the attractions that will appeal to the garden tourists. And I think an important part here is authenticity. And the more, these garden tourists are looking for authentic travel, a lot of, I guess, tourists are looking more and more for authentic travel, but garden tourists specifically, and I think communities in bloom communities offer that experience. And of course, my experience of communities in bloom is you're welcoming and you're inclusive. And so those are assets in terms of looking at garden tourism. So the garden tourism clientele, who are they? Dave, do you want to?
Well, absolutely. The psychographic of garden tourism is quite interesting. I think a lot of people immediately think of an older demographic, but in reality, it's 24 years of age and up, and we certainly see that here at Butchart. At least 3 different age bands. We see young kids loving the gardens with their parents. We see young adults as they're dating and early married and coming back with their children. And then we see grandparents bringing their families back. So really, it's quite a broad spectrum of clientele that we see here. They may have a fundamental interest in gardening. As we know, gardening is the #1 outdoor activity across North America. But they're also interested in beauty. They may be here as part of a group tour. They may be with a member of other members of a garden club, a flower or plant society. They could be industry members. They could be people interested in landscaping. But what we do know is that thousands of garden tourists are coming from neighboring communities and from around the world. I think people are very interested to see how other cultures garden. People from Asia come here to see what Canadians do in our climate. And when we travel in Europe, who doesn't go to see some of the iconic gardens there? So I think what we see is that garden tourist clientele is a good spendographic. They like the finer retail. They like the finer dining options. So it's a very deep market to work in.
Let me just put in a plug here for Richard Banfield. You see that this is the source of this information. And so he wrote the book on garden tourism. And I've been talking to him, and he's rewriting the book on garden tourism. And it's expected to come out in 2021. So he is checking up on what's happened since 2013 to now. And of course, right now we're in COVID world, so it's a bit different, but in a way, COVID world has also reemphasized, the importance and the appeal of gardens to the traveler and of course to your own clientele, but travelers also looking at. And so we will look for Richard Benfield's next edition of his book in 2021.
And
Dave,
I'm sure his book is going to lay out the opportunity that public gardens have in terms of being outdoor venues, being healthy places to spend time with friends and family and loved ones, socially distanced. And I'm sure you've got something to say about this slide, Michel, but I just wanted to make the point that I think for all community in bloom communities or public gardens, our primary market is always our hometown. Our benchmark is to be a place that locals want to go and visit first. And we know if we're beloved by the local community, that visitors to our area are going to ask locals what's good to see. And if the public garden is good to see for locals, then those out-of-town visitors are going to come. So I recommend that first of all, you build your community in blooms experience for your residents, for the people that are going to come every Sunday, for the ones that are going to come for their birthday and anniversaries. And then when they have visiting out-of-town guests, they're going to bring them along. And that's how public gardens, I think, get known. And that's a very virtuous way of earning your market, Michel, and eventually your province in North America. And it's amazing how far people will go to see a really good garden experience.
Yes, and we can see that Canadians and Americans, which is what this survey was doing, are interested and in gardens when they travel. I mean, those are big numbers for this market. And of course, a little plug here for the tulips in Ottawa, being from Ottawa. Now. How many are visiting? And these again are just numbers taken from a survey, showing that it's huge. There's a big market out there. When virtually half of the Canadians and Americans go to garden, our garden experiences while on a pleasure trip. Those are big numbers, and the fact that, over 10% of Canadians specifically travel to garden theme attractions and 13% Americans, it just shows to the scale of the potential that's out there. And I think when we think of a Butchart or we think of Matisse or these garden tourism destination, we see the impact and we see them. Dave, you would see more than anybody else in this country.
We do. We are mindful that attractions, I think people think of amusement parks and roller coasters, but in North America, we tend to underrate the outdoor garden experience. When we go to Europe and talk to people that travel within Europe to see gardens. It's garden tourism is a much more known quantity, and it's emerging in North America, how interesting it is to travel to see gardens. And Benfield, I know, brought out the startling statistic that more people have a garden experience on their holiday than go to Disney in a given year. And I know in Gardens, British Columbia, we work with the province, with Destination British Columbia, and they independently verified that garden tourism in British Columbia is worth well over $300 million a year. And that figure is 6 years old now. So it's there. I think people in North America need to believe a little bit more in it. And the opportunity for communities in bloom, towns across the country, is to really embrace it and put their best foot forward for garden tourism.
You're right, and I think we can be inspired by Europe and Asia, and also, you know, we talked to here about the Canadian and the American market, but we certainly have an appeal to the European market and to the Asian market, which have maybe more of a cultural affinity to it, and understand. So these again are just more information in terms of people traveling, and interesting in the tour sector, how, you know, how many tours include garden experience, because what their research showed them is that if they had a garden experience, then 66% of the tour experience, that they're more apt to buy into a tour that has a garden experience than that doesn't. And so, you know, if a tour travels and it stops and here and there, and so, you know, there's an opportunity also to connect with that market.
You know, I know people think of iconic gardens when we talk about garden tourism, but we have some very well-known gardens in Victoria, for example, like Abkhazi Garden, which is a small boutique garden that is just an amazing example of what it is. Every garden is unique. We think of Reeford Gardens and the very small community of 587 people that Alexander works in, and they see over 100,000 visitors per year. So it really is quality, not quantity, when it comes to garden tourism. People will travel a long way to see the best of. And in gardening, there is so much to choose from in order to specialize or do well or become known for. So it's a challenge for every community that is attainable. We don't have to be a big garden to attract visitors to our community. You know, there are great community examples across the country that have used the Floral Garden brand. Niagara on the Lake, Welland, the Rose City, and of course my own city now, Victoria. And it really is an opportunity for many communities across the country to put a brand forward that focuses on garden tourism. And you just need commitment, Michel.
That's right. We need
gardening,
commitment.
as we all know, is hard work. It takes vision, and I certainly have learned in my career, and I'm sure you can see it. Every garden has a founder. It has a passionate person, whether you think of Elsie Reeford or Jenny Butchart, somebody that had the driving passion to put a stake in the ground and say, you know, we're going to beautify, we're going to reclaim, we're going to do something beautiful for the residents of this town or city. And then people start to come because they're interested. So that initial passion and driving vision is very, very important.
And Dave, I think that's a good, you know, connection, because what I found in my attending Communities in Bloom and talking to people is Communities in Blooms comes from passion also. Yeah. The people, you know, Communities in Bloom wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the passion of the people. And so, yes, you need that passion, you need that commitment. You know, I would say that, you know, there needs to be that connection with the destination tourism office. I think when we see success stories like the Butcharts, like the Métis, they are connected to their tourism organization. And sometimes it's part of education, It's part of getting them to, showing them the bigger picture, what we're doing here today. We at the Canadian Garden Council, for instance, have been in some communities where we have given this workshop called Garden Tourism Readiness Workshop. And I think of Kingston, we went in there and they ended up with the Thousand Island Garden Trail and Thousand Island Rideau Canal Garden Trail, and where they saw the impact of that right away. And so it's that commitment, it's that passion, it's that understanding, and this collaboration with the partners. And of course, today what we're saying is, positioning on Canada's garden route. And Dave is right. We could have done another tour of the garden route, which would have been all very smaller or distinct gardens or themed gardens. So what we're saying here is what we've done on Canada's garden route, if you visit the website, is we have listed communities in bloom destinations, okay, and that have participated in this year's Communities in Bloom. We got the list from Communities in Bloom, and we've put it there. And so what we're inviting you is, if you are passionate, if you have that commitment and you want to go further, maybe you can position your community as a featured Communities in Bloom destination on Canada's Garden Route. And we haven't got that button up, but as soon as we get a community that is interested, we now have a featured garden button. Well, we will put up a featured Communities in Bloom destination button, okay? And then, our invitation to you is, again, to work with your destination, to have that tourism strategy. And we would like to invite you. I think most of you would know that the next Communities in Bloom Symposium, COVID permitting, is planned for Victoria in the fall of 2022. At the same time, the Canadian Garden Council will be hosting a global garden tourism conference. And so what a great opportunity to connect the dots here. And what we're saying is, if you're going to be attending and you have this tourism commitment or interest, maybe is to appeal to someone from your garden tourism destination to attend the conference with you, and so that we can have a great conversation. And so that kind of brings us to this slide saying that if, by being a featured Communities in Bloom destination, this is sort of the positioning you would get. And we can go through that. If you have an interest, you can certainly connect with myself, and we can talk about that in terms of what is provided there and what we would require. So just to finish off before we go to some questions, is the Canadian Garden Council. For some of you, this might be new. So we were founded in 2017 with the collaboration of CNLA, and our vision is there. We champion the garden experience sector, and we promote the joys and the benefits of gardens and gardening, and municipal landscapes and living green infrastructure. Our mission is there, and you can review that, but we are there to to foster awareness, development, and growth of Canada's garden experience sector. And our activities, so we manage Canada's Garden Route, which we've talked about. We do garden days in June, from June 12th to the 20th in 2021, which we invite you to participate. Many of you have in the past. National Garden Day, June the 19th, the Garden Tourism Conference. We have Garden Tourism Awards, and we have a special project that we're working on now and with CNLA, and that is to have 2022 designated by the Canadian government as being Canada's Year of the Garden, so that we can really position Canada's garden family and everything we have to offer. And that is the end of the presentation. Dave, any words of closing on your part?
I think my last thought for everybody is that positioning your community along Canada's Garden Route and embracing garden tourism, and the opportunity to come to the conference really puts you into a group that is full of ideas and inspiration, and will help you go back to your home garden with beautification ideas and ways to really economically diversify. This is at its core a good opportunity for economic development for every small town and community across Canada. We hope to see you at the next conference in Victoria.
Bill, all yours.
Okay, I'm just looking at a chat that came in to see if there was a question there. To start, I'd like to, of course, thank Michelle and Dave for that inspiring presentation. Scary part is when you went through the garden tourism route, I've been to every one of those gardens except for 2, so, and I didn't think I'd been to most of them, so
that's good.
That's good. So we've had a couple of questions come in. So I'm going to cover the ones that came in through the Q&A first. The first one is from Dr. Andrea. Does Canada Garden Route operate as a tourism destination management organization? Does it work directly together with tour operators, providing offers for individual travelers? Do you offer the garden route for the MICE sector as incentive tour destinations? So there's kind of 3 questions wrapped up into one there.
Okay. So maybe just, we operate as the Canadian Garden Council, not a tourism destination management organization. But as you can see, Dave, which is our vice president, has been very involved with tourism management organizations and brings that to the table. Yes, we do connect with tour operators. We get questions, we facilitate. And we do answer questions from individual travelers when they come, and certainly we welcome sort of the incentive tour destination. And when you work with your DMO, your local destination marketing organization, they have that. And what we're saying is we do not have to become that organization, because that's a specialty in its own, and they understand that world. What we have to do is package and prepare our experience for that world and listen to them in terms of their need. And I always say one of the big issues is tourism gets planned ahead of time, a year ahead of time, tour operators put packages together. And so sometimes we say, oh, well, next spring we'll decide what we do. Well, by that time, the tour has already been sold, packaged and sold. And so it's a matter of understanding the needs and the timelines. Dave, you would definitely support that.
Yeah, we essentially provide a product that has attributes that are easily communicated and sold. So I think what the Canada Garden Council does is share information and helps those garden experiences that are ready to take the step to become export ready and work in the tourism market where there are certain criteria around being open for a significant portion of the year with established operating hours, that kind of thing. But really, Canada Garden Council brings all the passionate product people together, and we feed the DMOs and the marketers of the world and give them the product to sell.
So you highly recommend working with a DMO if there's one locally, correct?
Absolutely.
No matter what. Okay. Just for those, because I was wondering what MICE sector stood for: meetings, incentives, conferences, and exhibitions. I didn't know, I had never heard that term before. So I think you answered that question.
We do.
Just to add to that, we've often been like here in Ottawa, where I am, is when a conference comes to town, they have spouses or partners, packages, tours. We're very much part of being there and saying, hey, we have this, okay? Or sometimes they're looking for a location to have an event. Here's a beautiful garden, that you can host your event in. So there are many ways to integrate to the various sectors of tourism.
As a venue, for certain.
Yeah.
Okay, a quick question from Darlene, CIB rep from here in BC. How does a community access that garden workshop you're talking about, garden readiness?
I'd invite you to please get in touch with me. We have a professional leader that can go to your community, and it's a matter of putting the garden experience part with some of the tourism leaders and going through that one day to understand how we can work together.
Okay. Another question, I had it down as well, but I think you kind of answered it toward the end. But how, like in practice, how do you get on Canada's garden route? What's the process?
Okay, so our feeling is that every garden experience in this country, in Canada, should be on Canada's garden route. And so we have that more gardens button there. And so whenever we find gardens or we hear about, you know, we plug it in there, and at least it's a link that is there. And then, of course, you know, we have this way that some of the gardens that want to be more interactive, they can upgrade and they can position themselves. And as I said, we work, for instance, the Heritage Gardens with the museum sector, and we work the park gardens with the Parks Canada. And so just like Communities in Bloom, we would like to have every participating Communities in Bloom there, so that if someone's looking, but then if someone is really wanting to position themselves as a garden tourism Communities in Bloom destination, then they can upgrade and be featured. Does that answer?
Okay. Yep. There was a couple of comments. One was posted in the Q&A. I'll just pass along before I forget as we get closer to concluding here. Thanking you very much. I think it was well appreciated. We had a follow-up from Dr. Andrea in Europe saying thanks so much for the presentation today, was very good. So just wanted to cover those off. There's a couple of questions that are kind of between two participants, so we'll avoid or we'll ignore those. But in fact, they are. It's a conversation on how do we do this. Let's get going. So a couple of passionate people out there at least. Dave, I have a question maybe, and this might be hard for you to answer because of COVID this year, but the one thing in the garden center sector where I'm from that we've realized this year, and I haven't realized that we've experienced it firsthand, the demographic for people getting into gardening, and particularly plants, sometimes it's just house plants, sometimes it's just succulents, cactus, whatever, but that demographic is going down and down and down.
Yes.
We have more young people. And I know with the restrictions you have on you know, attendees at the garden this year, but maybe you can provide a little bit of fortune telling or whatever. Do you see that demographic? It was mentioned that it was a 24 plus, but do you see that demographic going down?
I do. I've actually been seeing that for years. I used to worry that in the digital world, gardens would lose their place of importance, but I think particularly in COVID, when people are thinking about food security, are needing a place to go with loved ones for solace, or need to get outdoors and get some exercise. Young children understand gardens. You bring a young child to a garden and their eyes light up. You don't have to keep them occupied. They're just, you know, completely enthralled with the scents and the colors and the textures. So I think it starts in all of us very young, but we see teenagers here. The Instagram culture drives this, the love of photos. Photography has seen this incredible resurgence because it's more accessible. So where better to go than Van Dusen Gardens or Butchart Gardens or Toronto Botanic Garden to get some really unique shots. So people want to go home and then do it. You know, it's a do it culture. So they come to places like Butchart and then they leave inspired and they want to act on that. So there's this real synergy, I think, between the retail side of what we do in the gardening world and what we do on the display side to build that inspiration. But I wouldn't for a second think that gardening is an older demographic activity. It really isn't, whether it's garden enjoyment or actual physical gardening. It goes across all age spectrums. And I think that the younger people get involved, the more lifelong their involvement is going to be. They really are lifelong customers, whether they're doing it or perhaps in their older age, they're just visiting and enjoying it. So it's a tremendous industry to be in. And I think there's a lot of opportunity coming out of COVID when interest is high. You saw it in your garden center, Bill. I think the key for all of us next year is to convert that momentum and get it into more visitation on the public garden side and keep the retail side going next year strongly. I think that's good for the planet, frankly.
Yeah, and I think also, you know, we need to look at that and adapt. Just like in your garden center, now that you see this new clientele, you're going to look at, okay, what are they looking for, and what can I offer? So I when I speak to the gardens, I bring up this idea that, hey, maybe you've been doing it this way, but suddenly this new demographic coming is also looking for something a bit different. And so you have to keep that in mind as we develop these garden experiences across the country and in the various communities.
Terrific. So we're just about through our time here. One other thing that came in, Michelle, you apparently have to get on the phone right after this meeting because I don't know if Oshawa Botanical Gardens is a member of the Garden Route, but apparently they have the largest collection of peonies in Canada. So they should be.
Yeah, they
So
should be, definitely. I'm going to make a note here. Yes.
Gardening's all about the big
Garden. Okay. So that's from Darlene as well, who, in addition to being a CIB board member, is a very passionate peony grower, I believe.
Excellent.
A collector or whatever the case may be. So I just want to once again we've got a couple of minutes here, so let me just ask if there's any other final thoughts from you two before I wrap up.
I just, you know, building on your question, Bill, I think people want to see, you know, some of these, the values that they see in their public garden reflected in their community. And that's why CIB is such a great organization and movement. People want to see beauty, they want to see sustainability, they want food security, and these are all elements that can go into landscape. They want to see issues like global warming attacked. And what better way to do that than through the way you groom your community? There's so many different themes that can be weaved through gardening that make our country stronger and better. And our flagship public gardens are one part of that. Your retail center is another important part, but together I think we are on a mission. And if it reflects in the way our communities are planned, and deal with their urban structure, then that's a great country to live in.
Yes, definitely. I think, you know, we're part of the sustainability of the future sustainability of this country. And I think, you know, that's why personally I'm so excited to work on the idea of having 2022 as a year of the garden, is we can bring everything together, you know, and we call it the garden family, Canada's garden family. You know, we have to work together, and COVID has kind of brought this to the forefront and has created new opportunities, and I think the governments are listening, and we have to be part of the solution, and this is a great time to be part of the solution, and we have that opportunity, so we need to jump on it. And so thank you for giving us this opportunity today to speak to all of you in the Communities in Bloom world, and let's hope we can collaborate in the future to take it to the next level.
Perfect. Okay, thank you again, you two. Really appreciate it. This is actually the last of our symposium webinars, so I want to give special thanks to all of the presenters, including the two from today, and particularly to Butchart Gardens for sponsoring this webinar, but in fact to all of the sponsors that have sponsored the workshops over the last couple of weeks, 3 weeks, I guess. So we hope that everybody today can join us tomorrow for the National Awards and Community Showcase. That's the second to last event, I believe, of this year's virtual symposium. It's at 1 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And then we'll wrap everything up with our town hall session, which I think all of you should participate in. It's the last chance to kind of get questions answered and be involved in this year's virtual symposium. And that's on Friday, October 9th at 11 a.m. So thank you again, everybody. Thank you to our sponsors. Thank you to all of our speakers. I guess that's a wrap for this section of this year's virtual symposium. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.
Thank you.
Thank you.